Hey guys, we are here for lesson 15, and we're going to continue the same stuff that we were doing last time, where we were placing numbers or fractions rather on a number line. Last time was a real introduction to that, so we went through and we had like a number bond and a rectangle and the number line itself, and we used all three of those tools to just go from 0 to 1 on a number line. And so if we were doing thirds, we'd have 0 thirds, 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3, with 0 thirds and 3/3 being 0 and 1. And then we'd fill in the fractions in the middle. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to do similar work to that, but we're also going to they're going to give us a fraction. We're going to identify where that fraction belongs on the number line. So that's probably easier for me to show you than just talk about. So let's do it. Oops, sorry, wrong screen share. Let's try that again. There we go, that's better. All right, so we are going to estimate to label the fractions on the number line. Be sure to label the fractions 0, 1, write the fractions above the number line, and draw a number bond to match a number line. So there's like 1,000 steps to each one of these. But that's important to be able to read all the directions and do all the steps. So let's look at this first example. They went 0 thirds and 3/3. So you notice all these boxes are empty. We are always going to start with 0 thirds and or 0 over whatever, and this one's going to equal 1. So if it's thirds, 3/3. This one's fourths, so 4/4, 5/5. Remember, if the numerator and denominator equal each other, then that's equals 1. So on this box, the numerator and denominator will always equal each other, and they'll always be whatever denominator is there on the fraction that we're given. So basically what we need to do is we need to take this fraction right here, 2/3, and we need to place it on the number line. What I prefer you do is you actually draw on all the thirds, right? So this is one, they said draw it above, 1/3, and this is 2/3, and then you'd put like a big dot on 2/3, for example. I think when you just try to draw on sort of randomly, I don't find that to be as beneficial to you. So I think it's better if you draw all the fractions on, and then highlight the one that they're looking for. And then you'll notice over here, in our last lesson, we did unit fractions here, and they're not necessarily doing that in this lesson. So we'll say that like 2/3 and 1/3 equals 1 whole. So what that's saying is like if you added up this part and this part, that represents 2/3, and then this last third is represented by that other bubble on the number bond. So a lot of steps. It may seem sort of cumbersome or difficult to go through all those, but with more practice, I'm sure you'll get used to it. So over here, we're working on fourths, so I can put 0/4 equals 0, 0 out of 4, and 4 out of 4, 4/4 equals 1. Now, since I know I'm working at fourths, I'm just going to put my marks on here to begin with, and I can put 3/4. That's my third one. So 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4, and then I can put a dot right there. So again, it's not telling you necessarily that you have to like put these in here, but I find it way easier for you guys to understand if you do, if you have some context to what you are putting on the number line. So we can then draw a number bond. 1 is 3/4 and 1/4. And the reason for that is, say we have 1, 2, 3, that's 3/4, and this last part is 1/4. We won't do that for every time, but I think it's helpful to show you the first few where the parts of our number bond come from. All right, now we're working in fifths. So I know that my first part of my fraction, number line rather, is going to be 0/5, and my last part is going to be 5/5, because I'm working from 0 to 1. So I found my endpoints. Now I need to break into fifths, and I'm looking for the third fifth. So 1/5, 2/5. This one is 3/5, and this one's 4/5. So I had 1/5, 2/5, 3/5 was one of my bubbles. And then I have to figure out how many fifths were remaining. Well, there's one here and one here, so that's 2/5. And a good way to check is, we're working with the same denominator. So add your numerators and make sure they add up to, in this case, 5. Because to get to 1 equals 5/5. If you add that 2 and that 3, you get up to 5/5. So that's a good way to check. All right, we're working with sixths here. We can fill in our endpoints, 0/6 and 6/6. And we can go ahead and break these into thirds and then break our thirds in half. So we have 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, and 5/6. And we are looking for the 5th sixth. So 1 whole is the same as 5/6, which takes everything up to there. That's all 5. And then we have 1/6 remaining. So we need to add that in a bubble too. All right, and the last one is working in tenths. So 0/10 equals 0. Again, 0 in the numerator is always going to equal 0. And 10/10 equals 1. And numerator and denominator matching each other means we have 1 whole, 10 out of 10 parts. And I'm going to break this into fifths first. You guys can't see it, but I'm sort of looking up at my fifths here and matching them, and then I'll break each fifth in half. By that, I mean then I'll take between 0 and this fifth here, I'll make a line. Between those two, I'll make a line. Between those two, I'll make a line. Just makes it easier for me to see spatially. It's works for me. You might have a better strategy for yourself. And 3/10 is 1, 2, 3. 3/10. That's a strategy by the end of this sheet, by the end of this sort of work you might be able to do. I want you to put all the marks on, right? And we labeled them in every other one, but if you get to this point and you're really comfortable with that, you might be able to make all the marks, but then find 3/10 without labeling everything else. That would be appropriate. So we had 3/10 on one side. Now I need to figure out how many more tenths do I have? Well, 1. It's kind of like, it goes back to like when you're learning to do like jumps on a number line in like kindergarten or first grade. Same sort of thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We did 7 jumps, so 7/10. So it's the same stuff that you learned when you were younger. We're just using it with fractions now as opposed to whole numbers. Whoops, crash. Sorry about the camera. All right, draw a number line. Well, let's do that first. Use a fraction strip. We're not going to do that part. We're just going to say 0 and 1. Okay, we basically need to make a number line with 8s. We don't have a fraction strip here with us. So to make 8s, I'm going to make fourths first. And if I have 4 things and I split each one in half or 2 parts, then I'm going to end up with 8 things because 4 times 2 is 8. So that's why that works. Here we go. And I can say 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and then this would be 1 is equal to 8/8, and I should label 0 as well. 0 is equal to 0/8. Count up from 0/8 to 8/8 on your number line. Touch each number with your finger as you go. So we kind of just did that. It would be like if you're counting 0/8, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8. All right, here's a classic 3rd grade problem that we get a lot of in our fraction unit. It says, for his boat, James stretched out a rope with 5 equally spaced knots as shown. So we get these problems. We get this with either like coat hooks or knots all the time. That's the 2 types of problems we get with this. So starting at the first knot and ending at the last knot, how many equal parts are formed by the 5 knots? Label each fraction on the knot. So here's where 3rd graders run into trouble with this sort of problem. They just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're working in fifths, but we're not working in fifths. We don't just count the number of knots because the first one is 0 and the last one is 1 on a number line, right? We're looking for how many spaces there are. There's 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4 space. So we're working in fourths, not in fifths. Because the first one, you haven't, like, there's That's like the end point, that's 0. And the other part is like, this is one full piece of rope at this point. So we're at 1. So from here to here is 1/4 of the rope, 1 out of 4 sections. Remember, we're talking about like how many sections we have of this rope. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 2 out of 4 sections of the rope. We've used 1, 2. Once we go up to here, we've used 3 out of 4 sections of the rope. And lastly, 4 out of 4 sections of the rope, right? This type of problem comes up all the time. And I am telling you, in every year that I've ever taught 3rd grade in my career, I see people do this: 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, or maybe they figure out that it's 4th, but they start labeling it. They're like, oh, there's a knot there, so that must be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and they get it labeled incorrectly that way. So just be careful, be paying attention. Think about it as if like you're using rope that's like in a spool. If you're here, you haven't used any rope yet, right? You can't say you've used any rope till you move past that 0 point, past that end of the rope. So we found out here that there were 4 equal parts. What fraction is at the 3rd knot? So now we gotta say, well, 1 knot, 2 knots, 3 knots. The 3rd knot is 2/4, because then you do have to start at 0 and go 1 knot. This is 1 knot, 2 knots, 3 knots. And lastly, it says, what if the rope had 6 equally spaced knots along the length, same length? What fraction would be measured by the first 2 knots? Well, I'm going to draw it again. If you ever get a problem like this, I recommend you draw it. So it's basically saying draw the same rope as we have here. So I drew about the same length. And now we're going to space out 6 knots. So I have 1 and 2 already. I have 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 4 more knots to squeeze in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I have 0. I have, how many gaps do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those gaps there, those spaces, those are what we're really considering here. There are 5 sections of rope. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and 5/5. Now that in itself takes some work. Like, you really have to understand what's going on in the problem even to get to that point. But that's not all they asked you to do. They actually didn't even ask you to do that at all. It just said what fraction of the rope would be measured by the first 2 knots. All right, so I'd say that's the first one, and this is the second one. So that's 1/5 is measured by the first 2 knots. All right, we went from there to there. So even though this is 0/5, that doesn't mean 0 knots out of 5. I think that's where kids get a little confused. The fractions aren't showing the number of knots. The number of knots is just showing where the sections start and end. And so we have to think about this being 0 out of 5 sections at this point. This is 1 out of 5 sections. Even though it's the second knot, to go from the end of the rope to the first knot in, or the second knot on the rope, is 1 section of rope. And that's what the fraction represents. The fraction is not representative of the number of knots there. The number of knots just help us understand how many parts there are to this rope. Again, we're going to get the same thing with coat hooks eventually. It'll be like, kids in a class are lining up their jackets on a coat hook, and there's like a nail there, a nail there, a nail there, a nail there. There's 4 nails. How many spaces are there? Whatever. There's 3. It's broken into thirds, right? Good job with this. I know, again, this is a step up in complexity from what we've been doing. I encourage you to ask questions if you have them, and we'll continue going over this. We continue this work with putting fractions in a number line for a while. So keep at it, keep asking questions, and we will get there as a class. Good job.